Yeah, and if you guys will humor me for a second, I apologize if you came to the breakout group. I want to spend just the first few minutes sharing my story. Can you raise your hand if you've heard my story? Raise your hand if you haven't. Okay, so a lot of people haven't, so humor me for just a minute as I share my story, because I didn't originally plan to do a talk on GLP1s. And I do wanted to say how incredible the speakers were earlier about mindset. Like, God, I get so inspired about that. But so my story actually began, my health journey began when I was 12 years old. When I was 12 years old, I was diagnosed with anorexia. I was about 5 feet tall and 57 and a half pounds. So I spent 2 months in inpatient treatment. I actually was given about a 10% chance to live. I thought that was going to be the last time I saw my parents as they walked out back to Texas for 2 months. Was immediately put on a 24-hour tube feeding system. The ingredients in tube feeding systems, corn syrup, maltodextrin, soy protein, they are the same today, I'll be 42 next week, as they were back then. And so I went from starvation to the 24-hour tube feeding system and the standard American diet. As you can imagine, that was a difficult transition. I was put on 7 different medications. And I was told, I remember 2 weeks after I was admitted, the psychologist told me, if you recover, you will have an eating disorder for the rest of your life. And we remember, Bronson and Natalie's talk, what you hear, what you internalize really impacts your life, right? So I remember thinking, even as a young child, like, oh my God, if I recover, I'm going to have to become a high-functioning person with anorexia. I'm going to have, they told me I would likely be depressed. I would likely deal with anxiety. They said, you might be back. There's several girls in there that 2 or 3 times they've been in inpatient treatment. And they weren't wrong. I was so fortunate to become weight restored, but through my adolescence and into adulthood, I struggled mightily. And I talk a lot about this in my book. Thank you so much to everyone who's come up and talked to me about my book, The Dietitian's Dilemma. I really appreciate that. And when I was an adolescent, I wanted to become a dietitian because I just had this intuition that there was something that I was missing. I felt like I was standing on the sidelines of my own life. Like I would see my friends and other people participating in things. I was always anxious. I was thinking about food. I was worried about it. And as Tro was talking, I was like, can we tell all dietitians about this hyperglycemia, carbohydrate, blood sugar thing? And so, I became a dietitian, went into the dietetics program, and there were things that just didn't make sense. I remember we went into a room with somebody that had type 2 diabetes, and my preceptor said, okay, we're going to teach them how to manage their diabetes. They're going to have 90 grams of carbohydrates per meal and 50 grams per snack so we can dose their insulin. And I was a student. I just said, oh, should we teach them to eat less carbohydrates since their blood sugar is high? Oh, no, carbohydrates are so important for the disease states of all things, whether you were obese, whether you were underweight, overweight, heart failure, kidney failure. We taught our patients with heart disease, they had to eat very low fat. You could have pancakes, you could have orange juice, you could have bananas, but no bacon, no salt. And then I remember we went into the ICU. There was a person that had just been in a traumatic car accident, and they were on a tube feeding, flipped over the ingredients. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is what I was fed when I was 12. At that time, I was 24. I'll be 42 next week. And we are feeding people that cannot eat corn syrup, soy protein, maltodextrin, canola oil. And I just asked questions, you guys. I said, is this the best way to feed people? And so when I became a dietitian, you're like, okay, well, I'm young, I'm learning, maybe I don't know. And I saw this cycle of sickness. People would come into acute care with type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes. You'd see them in a month. We call them frequent flyers. Now they have an infection. Oh, now they're coming in for an amputation. And doctors and dietitians, they just kept telling us, they're just not following the guidelines. They're not doing what they tell them to do. And at the same time, as a young person and a young dietitian, I'm reading these papers and seeing the statistics, and they're getting worse and worse and worse. And at the same time, for my own health, I've been very fortunate. I've always been relatively lean, but mental health issues run in my family. My mom's bipolar, my grandma was bipolar. As I shared, I had a very serious eating disorder. I was anxious. I was a very anxious person. And so when did my life change? All right, so that's me. 2019, I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. I became an athlete. I was very close. I was just a few minutes away from the qualifying time. And I was running really, really well. Things seemed okay. And all of a sudden, it just felt like my running performance fell off a cliff. Where I was used to going for 8 to 10 mile easy runs, I went out for a 2-mile run and my body ached. I must just be sick, it's okay. The next day I was driving to work and I broke out in a cold sweat. My anxiety, which was at a baseline pretty bad, went to paralyzing. I literally remember being in my office and I started shaking. What is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? Has anybody been at that point where you feel like things are getting really bad and you don't know what's going on? Like you're genuinely scared. You don't have to raise your hand, but have you been genuinely scared? And so what do? You Dr. Google, you ask for help. I reached out to a sports dietitian and said, hey, look, this is what I'm doing and I'm scared. I don't know. And she said, oh, you're only eating 300 grams of carbs a day? You should be eating 400, maybe 500. How do y'all think that went? So briefly, because I don't want to spend this whole presentation talking about myself, I ended up doing that, and my come to Jesus moment, I worked, like I said, in the hospital in acute care, so I floated, meaning I covered different floors. Covering oncology. We had a very young patient pass away. I came home early, fell asleep on the couch, probably like 4 p.m. And I woke up and it was like 2 in the morning. And my joints hurt, my body hurt, I was aching. And I remember standing in my kitchen and I did not know what to do. Here I am, I'm practicing exactly what I teach my patients. My patients are failing. My health is failing. My relationship, while wonderful, I think my wife would tell you I was a little bit short and maybe not super kind at times. And my running, which is something that I believed in and I loved and I had such a goal for, was gone. I couldn't even run. And so at 2 in the morning, I drove to 7-Eleven, got 30 pounds of ice and put it in the bathtub, and I'm in the bathtub crying in an ice bath. And that's when my wife came in and said, you know, maybe we should do something different. Maybe we should do something different. And if you had told me, you know what, that is going to be a pivotal, exciting turning point in your life, I would have been like, get out of here, are you serious? You know, you think, oh, everything is gone. Everything I love is gone. I remember crying. I remember being angry at God, like, why? Why would you take this from me? I'm a big fan of science, also a fan of Jesus, my only tattoo. But I thought, you guys, if I'm not running, why don't I try eating less carbohydrates? I intuitively didn't know they made me feel well. Did anybody here, can you raise your hand? Did you intuitively know you were probably not eating ideal, but you were getting pressure from a dietitian or somebody? Is anyone a dietitian giving them bad advice? Just raise your hand. Okay, yes, all right. And so went from keto, decided to do pure carnivore. Within 30 days, actually 3 weeks into a carnivore diet, my wife said, this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you. 11 years, which led me to down the rabbit hole. I was so angry. No one, as a dietitian, told me there's so many studies on ketogenic diets, so many. And I thought, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to change my hospital. You know, you go to the clinical director. I'm going to teach this. Nope, no, you're not. So anyway, that led me, you can read the rest of the book if you want, but that led me to the journey I'm on today, which is incredible. I ended up being able to run again. I no longer compete in marathons. I now do ultra marathons, so anything over 26 miles. I've competed, since I did this presentation, I actually had an ultra a week and a half ago, so I've now competed in 8 and 1/6, so that's pretty cool. But all right, thank you. It's pretty incredible. It's pretty incredible how the human body can heal, y'all. All right, but let's talk about GLP-1s, because like I said, I didn't really intend to do a talk on this. I'm certainly not a doctor, but I've seen an explosion of people using the GLP-1 agonists, the Wegovy, the Ozempic. And so I just want to talk about, I often see in practice, people start taking something and they may not fully understand the side effects and all the impacts it has on the body. So I think we have personal sovereignty. Everybody should absolutely do what they want to do. I have no problem with somebody who has type 2 diabetes saying, I don't want to change my diet, I just want to take insulin. That's your prerogative, but you need to know the options, right? You need to be informed. So let's talk about it. All right, so what is GLP? You guys, it's a peptide hormone. You know, most of us probably hadn't even heard of it until several years ago. It actually was, the GLP agonists were originally developed for people with type 2 diabetes. They were kind of pushed through the FDA really quickly because the FDA brought them, they brought these drugs to the FDA and said, let us show you the data. You will lose weight if you take them. And I absolutely guarantee if you take a GLP-1 drug, you will lose weight. But let's talk more about that in a second. But what is this hormone? You guys, it's the hormone that tells your body you're full. It's very simple. One of its primary functions basically inhibits glucagon. Insulin and glucagon act in opposition, so it prevents your liver and your muscles from increasing your blood sugar. That was very important in type 2 diabetics. And it tells your body you're full, reduces hunger, reduces cravings. All right, also it connects with the vagus nerve, once again, that sense of fullness. But one thing I think is kind of cool and interesting that you may not have heard about GLP-1, its function in your body, is it has anti-inflammatory properties. It actually interacts with immune cells. Why is this important? I think we have to be very careful looking at anything we do to our body, any medication we take, even potentially any supplements and things we take in a vacuum. It's like the mistake at looking at LDL cholesterol in a vacuum, right? We have to know its impact on all the different systems. All right, so this is a super cool study that I love. So what they did in this study is they basically took a group of men and they measured their GLP-1. How high is your GLP, the hormone right now? And so they got kind of a baseline data. And then they took them to the Windjammer. I mean, they basically took them to an all-you-can-eat buffet and said, go for it. You know, and obviously they followed them around. What did they eat? The higher the GLP-1 at the beginning, before they went in to eat, the less sugar and carbohydrates they ate across the board.
Wow.
So the higher their GLP-1 was, the less sugar and carbohydrates. This is very important. We're going to come back around and circle back around to this. GLP-1 may be impaired in obese individuals. And Tro talked about this a little bit. So we are seeing now, too, that people who are obese have a less GLP-1 response to specifically to carbohydrates. You know, they did a study where fat was equally satiating for lean and obese, but for carbohydrates, even the whole food carbohydrates, even having people eat potatoes and apples, you know, the people who were obese were still feeling hungry. Now, is most of our population who's dealing with obesity, are they only eating those unprocessed carbohydrates? No. So this is very concerning, right? Okay, so then they also did a study, what will cause a higher GLP-1 response? They kept protein exactly the same. So protein was the same, and they had one group eat either a very high carbohydrate, low fat diet, and they had the other group eat a very high fat, low carbohydrate diet. And which one do you think increased GLP-1? High fat or high carb? High fat, absolutely, absolutely. So one of my mentors, Dr. Bickman, control the carbs, prioritize protein, and don't fear fats. I'm also not somebody who is anti-carb. I certainly, to support my running, consume some carbohydrates, but I do believe they should be in relationship to your goals. If you do have type 2 diabetes, obesity, any type of insulin resistance, when we reduce our carbohydrates, we're going to be reducing insulin. And that insulin, hyperinsulinemia, too much insulin, is a primary driver of disease. So, love that. Okay, so how do we increase, sorry, I thought I pressed the button, GLP-1 naturally? We also know that high biological value protein increases GLP-1, high protein and high fat. What does that mean? And Maria did such a great talk on this. Eating enough protein. It's very interesting to me now that I'm in this space. I eat a lot of protein, and so sometimes I forget, but a lot of people don't. You know, it is very important to consume enough high quality protein, and I would consider the high quality protein the animal proteins. So getting the eggs, getting your salmon, getting your chicken, those things are going to make you feel satiated, and certainly fat as well. This is kind of terrifying. So we now know, as a nation, we're eating up to 70% of our intake is not just carbohydrates, you guys, is processed carbohydrates. Wow. Does this surprise anybody? No. You know, and this is not judgment, but do you ever go to the grocery store and when you're shopping, you kind of peek into the other person's cart, like, what do you got in there? And sometimes you go down like, you know, your wife is like, hey, we need coffee. So you have to go down the granola bar aisle and you're like, who is buying like Berry Burst, blow your brains out Pop-Tarts? Like, they make all these crazy Pop-Tart and Oreo flavors, but somebody is. Yeah. And you look in the grocery carts of people and you're like, where's the food? There's now chips and cookies, and I could do an entire talk on these processed foods and how they are very, you know, they're really designed to keep us from overeating them. But remember in the slides we just looked at, these ultra-processed carbohydrates, we're not getting a GLP-1 response when we eat those. So our kids who are dealing with obesity, us who are dealing with obesity, as we continue to consume these foods, we're still feeling hungry. This is problematic. All right, another way to naturally increase your GLP-1 is to move, is to exercise. I'm a big fan of exercise, but you don't have to be somebody who runs a bunch like me. But they did do a study where they found moderate to high intensity exercise. And so we also know, you guys, when you lift, when you certainly resistance training, but anything you do to move your muscles, muscle is the biggest depositor of glucose. So if you're dealing with any type of insulin resistance, you want to lose weight and get healthier, moving, you know, doing some short, intense stuff, resistance training is awesome. All right, so let's talk about GLP-1 drugs. All right, so I'm going to specifically focus on Ozempic and Wegovy because those are what the studies that I have. So this is the study they did at the 2-year mark where they found that 40% of the weight that people lost on these drugs was in lean muscle mass, and that includes muscle, bone. So that to me is also an issue. And they do specifically say with some of these drugs, if you're somebody who is elderly, if you're somebody who's at risk of sarcopenia. But when you look at this, do you think most people in our population can afford to lose 40% muscle and bone?
No.
Muscle. Right. Thank you, Chris. Why does that happen? And I didn't put this on the slide, but I had an opportunity to talk to a gentleman who has his PhD in biochemistry. I think this is very important. So we know when we fast, when you eat for a very long period, you don't eat for a long period of time, your hormone ghrelin increases. Ghrelin is that hunger hormone, right? Ghrelin stimulates autophagy. What is autophagy? That's cellular turnover. If anybody's followed the work of Dr. Jason Fung, he talks a lot about that. We want autophagy. We want our body to clean out those damage. So it's like if you have this super dirty room, you ever have a roommate, oh, it's terrible. You want to go in there and clean it out and make it all nice, right? Well, these drugs, they suppress ghrelin. They artificially suppress ghrelin. So you are now artificially suppressing autophagy. Does anybody think that's ideal? Well, I'm just throwing that out there. So we're not going to see a study on that. I promise you. Too much money. All right. So another study that just came out, at the 2-year mark, depression and suicidal and anxiety behavior was vastly increased. Why is this? When you're suppressing the feelings of hunger, you're also potentially suppressing everything else. They found out people weren't feeling joy. They found out people were experiencing the flat affect. And this was at the 2-year mark. Cravings came back. People said, I'm on this GLP1, I'm on Wegovy for 6 to 12 months. My cravings are pretty well controlled and I'm losing weight. A lot of times, I didn't talk about it, but there's also a lot of nausea and other things that happen with that. But within 2 years, what percentage of people quit? 70% of people quit within 2 years. But now, some of those side effects, you guys, the feelings of depression, the potential for your gut, food sits in your gut longer, that doesn't reverse. So my big concern is these are not really being explained to people. And from 5 to 10 years, when people are using these drugs at these higher doses and not adjusting their diets and not doing the resistance training, and potentially even more important, not addressing how did we get here in the first place? Let me address my mindset. Let me address my trauma. Let me address all those other things. That's my huge concern. This is a nice little warning on one of the back of the GLP1 agonists. Concern for long-term consequences on the thyroid gland using GLP1 agonists has been a topic of investigation. Liraglutide stimulated calcitonin release in rodent models, leading to thyroid gland C-cell tumor hyperplasia. That's thyroid cancer. I love it. Just says the effects on humans remain unclear, with further investigation being necessary. And if you scroll down, it says while the mechanisms remains largely unknown, acute pancreatitis, including potentially fatal hemorrhagic and necrotizing types, have been noted in users of GLP-1s. So once again, I'm not trying to scare anyone. I'm trying to scare you a little bit. But the point being, if we can do this naturally, because what's happening when we affect one system, when we artificially suppress ghrelin, it's having a cascade effect across your whole body. So perhaps are we better, before we go this direction, to go a different direction? Has anybody ever been to a presentation and you get really excited, but when you're done, you're like, I'm not exactly sure what to do now? Raise your hand, be honest. So my goal, I'm gonna give you a few things to do, but I'm gonna give you one very specific thing to do, so you're gonna be like, yes, I can do this, okay. So now I'm scaring you and depressing you, I don't wanna do that. All right, so let's do it naturally. What have we already talked about with food? We know when we focus on protein and fats, like Dr. Cho was showing, and stay away from the seed oils as much as you can, use those real fats, that we are going to increase GLP-1 naturally. We know when we move our body. What is this? I got a call in September of 2024 from a dietitian who said she admired my work, and so I was very flattered. Oh yeah, I'll take a call. And then she proceeded to talk to me about a product called Maté. And so what it is, it's a yerba mate concentrate. And she said, this product has changed my life and my patient's life. And she told me it increases your ketones, it's going to improve fatty acid oxidation, and it's going to improve you're not going to be sore, it's going to improve inflammation. And I was like, yeah, it's going to do my taxes and laundry too. Like, I was like, oh, I can't believe I wasted 20 minutes of my life. I bought into it because she told me she admired my work. But she said, and I said, no, thank you. I'm not interested. I get hit up, I'm sure, if you're influencers all the time with different products. But she said something else. She said, well, I'd like to show you some of the studies that Dr. Ben Bickman has done because he's on the board. And I said, I like Ben. I like Dr. Bickman. So you don't have to show me, I'll give him a call. So I called him and he said, all right, let me send you some samples. And he actually showed me the studies. And I was like, yerba mate? A plant increases fatty acid? And I I forgot about it. I put the tea in our cabinet, and then a week later, Corinne's my wife, she said, hey, where did we get that tea? I said, why? Well, I've been using it every morning and I'm not as hungry. For real? So, oh man, I gotta make another phone call. So I gotta call this dietitian back, like, all right, tell me more. Because you guys, one of the best things we can do in our ketogenic or carnivore or low carb journey is we have to remain open and curious. Be skeptical. There's a lot of nonsense out there, but be curious, because I was curious. All right, you got my attention. The most important person in my life says this is helping with her hunger. I'm looking at the study, so let's talk more about it. And so I was like, for my running, I'm a long distance runner. I have to be able to oxidize fat. My last ultra, it was a heat wave. It was like 90 degrees. It was so miserable. There's a guy in the starting line eating all these bananas, and I was thinking, like, oh no, you're not going to be able to oxidize fat. You have an insulin. You can't lecture people on the starting line. But I was blown away. I used this through my entire last training cycle. And I even called Dr. Bickman. I'm like, why do my legs feel so good? Why am I so less sore? Because I'm already so good at oxidizing fat. Like, I've been doing this for 6 years. And he said, Michelle, yerba mate, actually this specifically ultra concentrated, you've probably heard about this if you're in the science space about chlorogenic acid, actually increases the liver's production of glutathione. Glutathione is like soccer mom. It is like running around doing a million different things, but basically it's squashing inflammation. I was like, this is incredible. Okay, fine. So man, now I gotta call that lady back again and be like, all right, you were totally right. But we're gonna talk more about this. All right, so yerba mate, there's actually studies on this. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Again, nobody has told me about this stuff. But they did a double-blind study where they showed a decreased body fat percentage and was a potent anti-obesity reagent. So basically, without the side effects, people using this concentrate were burning more fat. They were oxidizing more fat. This was actually done by Dr. Bickman and his students. They concluded it selectively uprates GLP1 pathways. You no longer feel as hungry. This one, okay, this is what I was talking about. And can I get a raise of hands too? If you would like to be a little less sore and achy in anything of your life, and yes, me too, right? Because even I often think, and I'm so grateful, if nothing else in my life, like it's always my gift of gratitude to speak. Like I could do this every day and never be able to fully give back what's been given to me for my health. But being able to, to run and to pursue my passion is incredible. But when I'm at Safeway and I'm carrying those groceries back, I often think like, I need to be able to do this forever. Right. Sometimes you see people that just can't even do that, can't lift groceries anymore. So if there's something that can help me stay strong and not be inflamed, sign me up. I put this in there because I think it's really interesting. I often worry about, and the more I've been in this space, chronic pain, inflammation, and we don't have a lot of drugs that work really well to touch neuropathic pain. So this is a really long, Gary Taubes type level study. So if anybody's interested, I can go into more. I do like Gary Taubes, but he's, long. So, but it was really interesting to me that they were able to show that this actually touched neuropathic pain. I thought that was cool. And finally, this was just for exercise. They showed that yerba mate, when people used it during exercise, they were able to have an increase in fatty acid oxidation, meaning you can burn more fat for fuel. That is so important. If anybody here is an endurance athlete like myself, you want to be able to burn as much fat for fuel as possible, even at faster paces and higher heart rates, because when Bob is out there eating a banana and feeling crappy, I'm still going and I've got 40 minutes left till I can eat any carbs, right? All right, in addition to that, in addition to yerba mate, this is piggybacks a little bit on what Dr. Cho was saying. Go to bed, go to sleep. I love sleep. I do not apologize for going to bed at 9 o'clock. If it's happening after 9, maybe once a year we'll go out dancing. But other than that, sleeping has been shown. not just to, you know, encourage GLP1, but also so many effects. They've showed that after just, you know, they're showing 3 or 4 hours of sleep disruption, you have an increase in your baseline blood glucose. So these are a couple of cool things. So, you know, obviously I talked a little bit about the yerba mate, and I was very skeptical. Actually, I honestly almost completely dismissive at first. But they have a system with the yerba mate, and they also have people use the yerba mate and a fiber matrix. The fiber matrix is called Balance. And I used to be somebody too, if you read my book, I'm like, yeah, fiber. Ooh. Oh no. Oh man, sorry, we'll go quick.
Great presentation.
Thank you. And that's it. All right. Fiber. And I've always been kind of like, and for me particularly, I was like, I don't know if I really need fiber. I eat a little bit of vegetables. But what they found is that, you know, obviously the yerba mate concentrate, it suppresses inflammation, increases fatty acid oxidation, squashes cravings. You don't have the food noise. But the Balance, there's a study that it reduced blood glucose better than metformin. Once again, if you know the type 2 diabetic drug metformin. So if you're somebody who eats carbs, or, you know, you're really struggling with carb cravings, the combination was really powerful. And so I particularly appreciate this gentleman who went down from 25 pills to 3, you know, and that's, once again, I said this in the breakout group, you guys, but the human brain and the human body have a tremendous capacity to heal. Tremendous. Just stabilizing blood glucose, just eating protein, fat, and fiber is incredible. But these things have taken it to another level for me and my clients. So that's why I'm talking about this. This is another gentleman in 8 months, got off 4 diabetic meds, off cholesterol meds, reversed fatty liver. Fatty liver really concerns me, especially because we're seeing it increase exponentially in children, right? So we know that fatty liver, one of the main causes of that is too much processed carbohydrates, too much high fructose corn syrup, particularly from soda. So cholesterol and triglycerides normalized, and lost weight. So raise your hand if you think that going on a carnivore, or when you went on a carnivore ketogenic diet, is the easiest thing you've ever done in your whole life. Was it really? I was gonna say, raise your hand if you've ever struggled. Okay, thank you. I said, it was the greatest thing I've ever done in my whole life. The first 5 days were an absolute nightmare. You know, an absolute nightmare. I didn't know about electrolytes. I was going from a very, very high carb diet to a very low carb. And at the time, my partner was less than supportive. Yeah, you know. Sorry, Crane. History. It's difficult. You know, obviously, history of an eating disorder. Say, hey, I'm just going to eat meat. You know, oh, you'll quit. It'll be fine. And I didn't. That second day, I had the worst headache of my life. Oh, how's that diet going? It's great. Leave me alone. But now we're both on the same page. It's awesome. So, what is the take-home message of this presentation? So the take-home message of this presentation is that GLP1 is a very important peptide hormone in our body that's produced naturally. And we can do a lot of things to stimulate its natural production. We can make sure we're getting plenty of high-quality protein, we're eating healthy fats, fiber, we can exercise, we can move our body, we can get to bed. And like I said, this yerba mate, unimate, is a powerful natural food product that's backed by science. And so how would you use this? You say, okay, Michelle, you piqued my curiosity. I'm skeptical like you were. All you have to do is a packet. You can put it in hot or cold water, drink it once or twice a day. Balance, I just drink once a day. If you're someone really dealing with insulin resistance, meaning your A1C is really high, or your high blood pressure, you can certainly use it twice a day. And that's it. That's it. Obviously, you would want to do the best you can to follow that with a low carbohydrate diet. But what I have found, anytime we can make things easier and support our patients, support ourselves, we're going to be more likely to have success. And so this is just another tool in your toolkit. So, oh, I've got one more slide. So you might say too, like, okay, yerba mate, I know they have some of that stuff at the store. Is it like the stuff at the store? No, it's not. What really makes it unique and special are 2 things, are chlorogenic acid and theobromine. So it's so ultra concentrated, it has 6 times the amount of chlorogenic acid as a regular product, like that you might find in the store, and it's much higher in the theobromine, which also helps with the GLP1. That's also good for mood stabilization too. Okay, and finally, so for everybody that's on this cruise, let's say, okay, I'm interested in this, please don't get on eBay or go to Walmart and get this. Use my code. Debbie's gonna send out, when she sends out the information or just the thank you for the cruise, there's gonna be a link If you want to buy, I'd be honored if you use my code. Anyone on the cruise that wants to end up buying, you're going to get a free 30-minute consultation with me. If you don't like me and you think I'm boring, then give it to someone you don't. So, all right, you guys, I really appreciate your time. I'm done early. So, yeah, I guess we'll do questions after that.